Hey, hi friends, very good morning to everyone. So first of all, thank you for just waiting for a week, and really sorry for not having classes. So to continue from the last class, of course, it's been very long time that we had a gap. So we are in the phase of discussing about Oracle Data Guard. So we have completed the theoretical portion wherein we try to understand what is meant by standby database and what are its advantages and disadvantages. And we also learned about the protection modes that are working. So basically there are three protection modes: max performance, max protection, and max availability. So we have seen how those modes of working will be. Then we have seen some new features of 12c, like we have a snapshot standby database and we have a far sync database or far sync standby. So such kind of things we have seen in the theoretical session, and we have started off with the practicals, wherein we have seen how to set up a standby database. So basically, more it is like a arm and cloning only. Only the difference comes is here and there you need to change some parameters. So except that every other step would be similar to arm and cloning. So we have successfully set up that standby database environment. So again, in the same manner as last class, we have taken two machines. One is machine one, which I am representing with black color screen, and the second one is machine two, which is having a standby database, and I'm just representing that with white color background. So I just started the servers and I just started the databases, and listeners and all. So basically I started the listener here on the primary database, and then I started up the primary database as normal, and I just checked about the sequence number. And similarly, on the standby database, I have started the listener on the top, and then I started my standby database in the mount state. And of course, when I started it in mount state, the sequence number is not catching up because the MRP process was not running. So then I have started my MRP here, and the moment MRP was started, then it has picked up the sequence number, and now with this command, we can say both the primary and the standby databases are in sync. So now whatever the transactions you do in the primary database, it should generate a new archeolog file, and immediately it should get in sync with your standby database. So let us perform a small test and see whether that's happening or not. So on the primary database, in one particular user, I'll just try to create some table, or I'll just insert some rows into the existing table. Okay, so there are no users. Let me create one user over here. And yeah, now I'm going to create some table in that. So now with the transaction, whatever I have done, like creating a new table and inserting some rows into that. So now log switch happened and one sequence number has been incremented. Now we need to run the same query on the standby to see if it is catching up. Yes, you can see here. So we have the same sequence number, means whatever the changes that we have done in the primary database, so it has been reflected onto the standby database. And of course, we know that we can open the standby database in read-only mode. So for that, first you need to cancel the MRP. So you need to execute a command like this. Then you need to just run the command alter database, open read only, and again you can start the MRP process. So as we discussed earlier, this is called as active data guard. So at any moment of time, both your primary database and the standby database will be in sync. So I am issuing a manual log switch. Oops, sorry. So now the sequence number is 10 here, and yes, so here also the sequence number is 10. So that's how the things will work here. And whatever the steps that we have followed in order to build a standby database, so whatever I have shown you is for a non-container database. So here we are, I mean, earlier when we tried to set up a week before, so we haven't used any uh, container database concept, but still the same steps need to be followed in order to build the standby database even for the container database and the pluggable database. So the same experiment you can do that. So you can create one container and pluggable database in one server. Uh, Probably you require two VMware machines. So in one VMware machine, you can just have Oracle 12c software installed and create one container and pluggable database over there. And you can follow the same steps as there in the standby setup guide. And you can do that standby setup for even further. So there is no change in the steps, even if it is a container or non-container database. So before we step on to the next concept, anybody having any queries, just let me know. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, that is changing the protection modes. So by default, whatever the configuration that we have done, so it is of maximum performance mode. Now how to identify like whether the database is maximum performance or whether it is a standby database. So we have a view in $V database. So these columns will tell you whether this database is a primary database or a standby database, and if standby database, what is the mode that it is working. So for example, here you can see the name of the database is ProdDB and the database role is primary and the protection mode is max performance. So same we can execute on the standby side as well. And here, of course, as I said, database name will remain same. So database role, you can see here, it is a physical standby database and it's working in maximum performance mode. So now how we are going to switch between this mode to another mode? Like let's say your client got a requirement or your client wants to now change the protection mode to something else. Then how you are going to deal with that? So that is what we are going to see here. Now the main important step either to change it to max availability or change it to max protection mode, you require the standby redo log files. So in your initial setup of the standby database, if you have not created any standby redo log files, then you need to create those standby redo log files first. Then you need to perform the change, or I mean to say, like, you need to change the protection mode after creating the standby redo log files. But if you remember in the standby setup initially, during that time itself, I have shown you how to create the standby redo log files and all. So that means again now we don't require anything specific to be done in order to change the or in order to create the standby redo log files. So directly we can go ahead and change the protection mode. So what plays important role in the protection mode, or how Oracle is going to identify whether this is a availability mode or protection mode and all, is with the help of one single parameter in log archive dest2 p file or sp file parameter. So there is an option called different options like log rater. So when you say log rater async, as you can see here, it means basically you want to use maximum performance mode. So we can query that and we can see here, show parameter. So here you can see when we have set up, we have mentioned this log rater async. So which means by default it will go for maximum performance mode. So if you want to change this to maximum availability mode, let's say first, then you need to change that parameter to logrator no affirm sync. So what this exactly means? So logrator, we know that logrator means logrator will go and write into the standby redo log files. You know that, and sync means you want Oracle to write into a synchronous mode. So synchronous mode in the sense it will write into the standby redo log files one after another. And you are saying no affirm means it will not wait for the acknowledgement. So that is what it means in maximum availability. So if you remember the architecture of maximum availability, we know that logrator will write into the standby redo log files, but it will not wait for the acknowledgement and it will continue with its normal behavior. But whereas in maximum protection mode, compulsory the primary logrator need to wait for the acknowledgement. And that is where if you want to change to max protection mode, here you are saying that logrator affirm. Affirm in the sense wait for the acknowledgement from the standby database. So if standby database is not responding, then don't proceed. So that is the meaning of this logrator affirm or no affirm. So first I'm going to change to max availability mode. So for that we need to just change the value of this parameter I can just do copy and paste because that is already available. And to see, like, because here we have given scope equals to both, so immediately it will be effective. So to see whether it has changed or not, you can just query show parameter, and here you can see it has been changed to logwriter no fm sync. Then you need to shut down and start up your primary database so that it is going to become a maximum availability mode. So first you are going to shut down the database. So by this you might need to understand that if we want to change the mode of the database, then we require a downtime, because all the users usually will connect to primary database, so we require a downtime. So of course you need to tell to your client well ahead of this. And we need to place our database in the mount state, and we need to execute this command: alter database, set standby database to maximize availability. Then of course you can open your primary database. Just a moment, this step was missing here. Yeah. So now you can execute the same query like earlier to check whether the standby database, or whether what is the protection mode. So now you can see your protection mode has been changed to maximum availability. And when you run the same query on the standby database side also, automatically it will change to maximum availability. So this is how we are going to change from max performance to max availability. So similarly, if you want to change to max protection, again you need to do the same thing. So we can run the parameter first, then we can issue a shutdown and startup. Here the things are just reversed, so let me arrange in order. So again we need to place it in mount state. So similar command like earlier, we just say set standby database to maximize protection, and finally open the standby database, open the primary database. And this query, whatever is given in this document, is a little bit different, but of course it is going to display the same information. It also takes about the instance name. So instead of database name, it will take the instance name. So here you can see the status is open, instance is prod.db, database role is primary, and the protection mode now is in maximum protection. So I can run the same query on the standby side as well. and here you can see it has been changed to maximum protection. So that's how you are going to change again to max protection. Now if you want to come back again to maximum performance, so you are going to run the similar command here. So this is one thing that you need to remember. So when you are there in the maximum protection and you try to change this log archive dest2 parameter, even though it is a dynamic parameter, you can use scope equals to both. But when you are there in the maximum protection mode, Oracle will not allow you to do that. And here you can see the error. Parameter cannot be modified because the specified value is invalid, and it is saying cannot change the protected standby data destination attributes. So which means if you are there in the maximum protection, even it will not allow you to change the parameter also. So what we need to do, of course, we need to shut down, and then we need to place it in bound state, sorry, no mount state, and then we need to change the parameter. So protection mode is not that much tough. So I just placed it in no mount state, then changed the parameter, then I have issued alter database mount, again changing to maximize performance, then finally opening the database, and we can execute this query. So again, if you see, it has went back to maximum performance mode, and sorry, here also it is same. So now here you can see it is max performance mode. So basically when you are changing the modes, you don't require to do anything on the standby database. So automatically it will pick up the things. You just need to execute the steps on the primary database. So any questions over here? Okay, so now let's proceed and see the next concept, switchover of the database. So as when we are discussing about the theory, I discussed about the two keywords. One is switchover and other one is failover. So switchover, as I said, is the concept of testing the standby database. So really whether your standby database is working as expected or not, and when users are connected, will they be able to do the transactions or not. So for that you are going to change the roles of the databases. So primary database you will make as standby database, and standby database you will convert into primary database. So that particular uh, role transition, so we are going to call it as a switchover. And there is a difference between performing a switchover in 11G database and 12C database. So the commands have been made very simplified in 12C environment. So on the top, whatever I have given here is are the 11G database commands, and bottom I have given the 12C commands. So if it is a 11G database, what we use it to do? So we use it to run a command called switchover status from the $database. So we use it to run both of them. So one more thing is still 11G commands also might work in 12C, but it is not recommended to use. So for example, here you can see when I execute this command on the primary database, it is saying that it is ready to switch over to the standby database. But whereas when I execute the command on the standby database, it will just show it as not allowed because it is still there in the standby environment. And then we use it to execute a command alter database commit to switch over to standby with session shutdown. Now what is this? So here we are asking Oracle to switch over to the standby database with the help of this clause with session shutdown, which means already in the primary database there could be some sessions connected and there could be some transaction being performed. So if there is any such sessions connected, you are just going to disconnect the sessions because you are going to switch over to the standby database. So for that we are going to use this clause. Then when comes to the standby database, if your standby database is in read-only mode, I mean it is open as read-only mode, then you need to place it in mount state, or if it is already in mount state, then there is no issue. So you are going to cancel the MRP first if it is in read-only mode. So cancel the MRP, shut down immediate, then place it in mount state. Then you are going to use a similar command alter database commit to switch over to primary. Then alter database open. So the moment you say alter database open, your standby will be open in read write mode. Means all the users will now connect to the standby database, and now means that becomes the primary. So your standby has now become the primary database. Then on your original primary database, you are going to execute. You just need to shut down and start up mount, and you need to start the MRP there. So the moment you start MRP there, then that will become the standby database. So with the help of 4 or 5 commands or something like that, you are going to do this activity. But when it comes to 12C, as I said, the commands have been simplified. So you don't require to do much things on the 12C database. And also Oracle has given one very good option that you can test whether the switchover will be successful or not. So we have a command called alter database switchover to your database name, standby database name, and verify. So here it should be actually standby. Okay, fine. So with this command, Oracle is going to verify whether everything is proper and your standby and primary are ready for switchover or not. If something goes wrong, then it is going to give you a message in the alert log file. Now let me run this command on the primary database. So here you got database altered. But instead of database altered, if you get something like database altered with errors or database altered with warnings, then immediately you need to check your alert log file, the primary alert log file. So in primary alert log file, there will be some message written why this switchover is not successful, or why the switchover will not be successful. So before performing the switchover itself, if there is any gap, you can resolve it with the help of this verify command. So I can say this is one of the savior that we have, because earlier in 11G and all we don't have this option. Until unless you go and do the switchover. If there is any problem occurs, then you need to fix that. But in 12C at least we have this option that you can fix the problem and then perform the switchover. And because now I haven't got any warnings or errors, I can just directly run the command alter database switch over to StanDB. So this command itself will change the roles. So by itself it will run the things on the primary database as well as it will do the things on the standby database as well. And it will shut down this primary database. So let us see the status of this. You can see the database has been shut down and it is saying Oracle is not available. Now how about the standby? So of course here also it will perform the things. So it will be disconnected. The session will be disconnected. Sorry. So now what we need to do? Now if you see, your standby database was placed in the mount state. So simply you need to open the standby database, because this becomes the new primary, and here you can see the database role as well. Earlier if you see, the database role is showing as physical standby database, and now you can see the role has been mentioned as primary database. And on the primary database means now we are going to set up it as a standby database. So here you are going to do the mount. You are going to place the database in mount and you are going to start the MRP process. And you can use the same command in order to check if the primary database and the standby database are in sync. Yes, now you can see they are both are in sync, and this has become the standby database. So the roles have been reversed. ProdDB earlier is a primary database, now it has become the standby database. StanDB earlier it is a standby database, now it has become the primary database. And just to test, you can perform a switch log file and see whether both are getting in sync or not. Yes, both places it is 21. So which means switchover is completed and successfully the things are working as expected. So now the biggest question is how the application will connect to the standby database automatically. So there are two things here. One is, while providing the TNS entry to your application team, you will be providing both in the TNS entry itself, you will be mentioning both the primary database and standby database. And wherever the database is open, automatically it will connect to that database. That is one point. And second one is, or second way is, whenever you do a switchover, you will give the new TNS entry to the application team and they will be updating in their application. So these are the two ways that we usually do. So suppose every time, like as I said, every 6 months you are performing the switchover activity. So every time when you perform the switchover, you need to give that particular TNS entry with the new host details and the port number and all, and application team will go ahead and change in their application code. Now that is not the right way, because uh, applications should automatically get connected through the standby, or whenever you do a switchover it should get connected to the primary. So all this should happen automatically. And how we are going to do that is with the help of this particular string. So here if you look at the TNS entry, we have provided two host details. So we have given, this is an example, so don't take it as the correct one. So here we are just mentioning it as host equals to one IP address and then a port number. And similarly, we are going to make another line with another host and the port number. So the first host would be a primary database, and the second host would be a standby database. And here we are saying failover is equals to S, and this is the one which is going to play a key role while connecting. And service name, we are going to say you want to connect to that particular database. Now suppose if you have an entry like this in your application, what happens? Whenever application wants to connect, it will try to connect with the TNS entry. So let's say the switchover has been performed from the database side. DB has performed the switchover. So first, this prod DB will try to connect to the database which is running on this server 131. Earlier, assume that 131 server is the primary database and 146 is the standby. Now, because you have performed the switchover, 131 will become the standby database and 146 will become the primary database. Now, but still, because you mentioned 131 first and 146 next, Oracle will first try to connect to 131, and it will not be able to connect. Why? Because no, it is in the standby side. It is in the mount state, assuming it is in mount state. So, because it is in mount state, it will fail to connect. And here you have mentioned one parameter called failover is equals to S, which means you are asking Oracle connection to, to transform. Like if it is not able to connect to 131, you are asking Oracle connection to go and try the next host name, that is 146. So 131 didn't work out, so the connection failed. Then Oracle will now try to connect to 146, and this time it will be successful because on 146 the standby database was the standby database was opened as primary database, so it will be successful. So that's how it will do a switch. Like first it will test the first server, if not it will test the second server, so like that it will keep on proceeding. Now the thing is, okay, so up to here it is fine, but what if the standby database was opened in a read only mode? Because when I make my standby database open in read only mode, obviously 131 itself will connect, because 131 basically if the database is open either in read write mode or read only mode, session will get connected. Only if it is mount state, session will not get connected. So assume your standby database is running on 131 and it is open in read only mode. Now obviously a session will connect, and but you cannot perform any DML or DDLs. So how to handle in such situations? In such situations, we are going to create something called service names. So let me show you a command. So with the help of very simple commands, we are going to create something called service name. So by default, when you there is a parameter called service underscore name. So when you run this command, show parameter service name, either in your primary or standby. So by default, it will show you that particular database name. So if you run this on primary, it will show you the primary name. If you run that on the standby, it will show you that standby name. So what we are going to do is, if you say standby or prod DB, then only the problem will occur. So we will take some unique common name. So either I will not mention in my TNS entry here, either I will not mention prod DB or I will not mention stand DB. Instead, I will mention something like this. Let's say my application name. So my app. So it means my application. So here I'll just mention something like this. So which means I am going to now connect to some service name by the name my app. So if you want this to get connected, first of all, you need to have this service name up and running in your primary or standby database. So what we do is we just modify that parameter. So we are going to say alter system set service name equals to whatever the existing name that you have and whatever the new name that you want. So both you need to mention here, and of course this is a dynamic parameter, so you can say scope equals to both. Then once you say alter system register, then this parameter will get modified and now it will show you two names. So for example, in our case, we need to just say standdb, comma, my app, my app. Then we need to have that entry in your TNS names as well. So whatever the entry that you have added, so that would be there in the TNS names. So once it is done, then it is going to start working. So that particular service name should be up and running over on the database side. And of course, you need to modify the listener as well. So it's just not mentioned here, but you need to have the listener also modified. So let me show you. So here, whatever you are seeing, earlier we just mentioned it as only SID name. So instead, now what we will do is we will create one more entry. So we will copy and paste the same thing, and something like this. Let me show you. And here we are going to modify the things. So for example, here I will say service name equals to my app, and of course we need to restart the listener. So the moment you restart the listener, now listener will listen to both standdb as well as my app. So then if you are connecting with that particular name to the TNS entry where that my app service is running, Oracle is going to connect to that particular database. So that's how, using a common name, we are going to differentiate that one. So that is how that happens. And if you are using a direct JDBC connections, then instead of using that TNS alias, directly people will mention the connecting string like this. First, they will mention the 131 server and then 146 server. So where the service is running, automatically your connection will go to that particular database. So it's basically to handle automatic diversion of the users, because every time application team cannot sit and modify the TNS entries, so it should be done automatically. For that, we are going to use this one. So any questions over here?
Pawan, can you again repeat that? You said, right, my app equal to description
Sorry,
and
just a
then you
moment.
have two hosts.
Uh, Sorry, Sachin. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. So, why we created a service name is because for the primary and the standby DB, right?
Yeah,
So, whichever is live, we can easily connect, correct?
right.
So, what was the issue with that TNS names where you have two host names, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the standby as well as for the prod DB?
Okay, so you mean to say like instead of my app, if I have
Yeah,
the database name.
correct. That was prod DB, right? Earlier.
Okay. So for example, let's say here you have something like a prod DB thing. So generally here whatever we mention is the instance name, not the database name. So
Yes.
suppose you mention like your TNS entry is like this. So what happens when you do a switchover is, let's say initially ProdDB was running in 131 server. Now you have performed a switchover. Now it is running on 146 server, and assume that your standby. Now 131 has become the standby database, and it was open in read-only mode. And your application has connected to the application tried to connect, and let's say your application is trying to perform some DML in the background, like from front end. Let's say you are inputting some values, and when you click on the submit button, it will insert a row in the table. Now what happens is on 131, the database now is a standby database, and assume it is open in read only mode. So what happens here is, by default, ProdDB or your application will try to connect to 131 server. Because the database was open in read-only mode, your connection will also be successful. But when you try to execute the DML, it will fail. Why? Because it was in read-only mode. So then, no, I mean, then you will be facing a issue, right? So it's like, the database, the connection is getting established, but you are unable to do DML and DDL because the database was open in read-only mode. So in order to avoid this, there are two options. As I said, you need to use a common service name instead of the database name, or you need to place your standby only in the bound state. Don't place it in open read only. So because when you place in mount state, automatically your connection will not go to 131 server, because 131 is anyway in mount state, so it will fail and it will connect to 146 server. So got the point?
Oh, okay. I'm just trying to understand. So you said, but that cannot happen, right? We cannot have your standby in the mount state always, right?
That is what I said.
So now
So depends.
131 is the standby mode, correct? 131 is in the standby mode.
Yeah, that is what, like, it depends on the requirement. Suppose you want standby also to be functional, you want some users to connect there and pull out the data, then you can have your standby database open in read-only mode, or otherwise you can just keep it in mount state.
Okay. Now how so service, you mean to say when you create a service name, it is smart enough to understand that and it will automatically switch. That's what you're saying. So if it is in read only, it won't go to that database. It will only go to the 146 server.
Yes, exactly. Because you will be creating that service only at one place. So you will not create that service in another. Like for example, right now this one is primary. So I will create a service name here, but I will
Got
not
it.
add that service here. So because the service was not there here in the prod DB, always it will connect to the stand DB.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Now it makes sense. Okay. Thanks.
That's how the things will work. Yeah, anyone is asking a question? Sorry.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you can open the listener.quora
Mm-hmm.
that you just previously, can you just please open it?
Okay. Yeah.
So the listener underscore stand DB and SID list listener stand DB.
Mm.
So what do we call these two? Are these service names or are these DB strings?
This one is definitely the listener name, and this is just the database name. This is not service name. So when I say SID is nothing but the instance name.
Okay.
So
Then what do we call those things? The first equal to the first line listener underscore stand DB and SID list listener stand DB.
basically, this is the entry of the listener. We call it as entry of the listener, and this
Correct.
we call it as to which database. I mean, this is the SID list to which the listener is listening. Like listener always should support some database. So to which databases this listener is supporting, that instance name list was given here.
Okay, but on what basis do we give names to listener, I mean, as listeners co standard be SID list listener standard? We should have some parameters so that we'll write it, right?
It is
So is
pretty,
it like,
yeah, it is pretty simple. It's something like how many DBs you have and how you want that connections and all to happen. So let me just take an example here. So, for example, if you have multiple databases like this in one server, and all these databases can have only one listener. So, suppose I want
mhm.
one listener to listen to multiple databases, what I can do is like this.
So SID names is database one, database two.
Yes, exactly.
No, that's a
So,
listener name basically.
yeah, so I'll just mention like this, and I will say some other database name here. Then I will say database 2, database 3 and all. So one listener itself will be listening to multiple DBs. But the problem here is if this listener is down, then automatically connections to all these databases will be impacted. So that's the reason generally what it is recommended is it is always recommended to have one-to-one listener. Like for each database, it would be better if you have a separate listener. So that is where we are going to create, like, for example, we will say for stand DB, this is the entry. And if you have another database, so what we do is we create another listener entry. So we will create something like this, and we will change the port number, the name of the listener, and here we will change the SID name, all those things. So always the good concept is having one-to-one listener instead of having, one listener listening to multiple DBs.
Okay, but the point which I'm looking at is, I mean, on what do we technically call the first line listener underscore stand DB or SID list listener stand DB? Do we specifically have a name for that? Can we say it as listener name or can we say it as a DB string name?
Yeah, I mean, frankly to say, entire thing we are going to call it as listener entry. And
Okay.
individually, if you want to give a name, we can say this is the listener entry or listener name, and this we call it as SID list.
Okay, so SID list doesn't need any protocol host port.
No, nothing. Why? Because this itself, here itself, you are mentioning the listener name. So automatically it will refer to this name. So that's why this name and this name should be same. So here you cannot have
Okay.
some other name. So this name and this name should be same. Then automatically it will be pointing out here.
Okay. So protocol will always be TCP or
Yeah. So protocol, whatever we use is only TCP.
okay. So in any of the companies, everyone goes with TCP, right?
Uh,
Or do also they go with IP?
I mean, till in my experience, at least I have not seen, anybody using some other protocol.
Okay, it's kind of a default protocol which everyone uses it.
Yeah.
And they also say that 1521 is the default port number which Oracle has given. So,
Yeah, Oracle
I
has.
mean, when we use that port number, it's like the security. When we use port 1521, so we do have some security concerns. So it's always suggestible to use different port number rather than using 1521. Is
Yes,
that right?
yes, exactly. So 1521 is the default one, but as per the security standards, it is not recommended to go ahead with 1521. So we need to use something else.
So for that, we can create it, or do we need to depend on
Nothing else.
infrastructure team who actually?
Yeah, I mean, something like suppose here you are using 1530 as the port number, so you need to make sure with your network administrator, you need to get in touch and you need to make sure that on this, I mean, 1530 port number is open for connection, first of all. And also with your Unix administrator, you need to check or you need to make sure that 1530 port number is open on the server. So two places it should be open. One is on the server, second one is in the firewall server.
Mhm.
But
Okay.
but usually by default, network admins they will allow some range. So if you ask them, they will tell you what ports you need to use.
Okay. So they would be suggesting us what port numbers to use,
Right, exactly.
or we would. Okay. Okay. Fine. Thank you.
No problem. So anyone else having questions? Okay, so that's how we have the switchover concept. I'm not going to show the failover, but I'll just show the commands here. So again, these commands are of 11G database and this is simply of 12C. So basically, if it is 11G database, first you need to cancel the MRP, means you are going to stop the MRP and you are going to run a command to finish the MRP. Finish the MRP in the sense from that moment onwards, MRP will not work on that database. So after you say alter database, recover, manage, standby database, finish, that database will no more going to be a standby database in future. It will become only a primary database, and you are going to activate the physical standby. So when you say activate physical standby, it means you are going to change the role to the primary database. So you know the failover situation. When the primary database is crashed, then only you will open the standby database. So for that, you are going to use this one. But as I said, in 12C, the commands have been simplified. So just you need to say alter database, failover to standDB, and you can just open the standby database. So that is all we have for today, and tomorrow we will see some real-time scenarios, like if there is a gap between primary and standby database, how we are going to resolve that with the help of Arman incremental backup. And if the databases are the primary database and is having a missing data file or a corrupted data file, how we are going to recover that with the standby database backup. So we are going to see those things. So thanks everyone for joining, and have a nice day. Let's meet tomorrow at the same time.